The people who are most devastated are the people who are either born into cults or brought in by their parents who get recruited into a cult when the kids are very young, and then they come out. Whether they're kicked out, or whether they have a nervous breakdown, or they have an overwhelming health problem and the cult doesn't want to pay for their treatment, they come out to an alien world. It's not unlike someone who's in a prison or in a POW camp and is brought out to society and has to be taught.
Everything.
Everything. Education. Has to be brought to the doctor. Maybe they've never seen a doctor and had a full physical.
Is it likely they've been educated while they were in the cult?
Usually they do their own education, which is basically indoctrination. And there's one cult that I'm working with that's prevalent in the Northeast that considers it a sin for children to have imagination. So if the children are playing with dolls, they are beaten with a balloon stick, a wooden stick, so that they shouldn't have these fantasies and imagination. And in talking with child psychologists, when I tell them this, they gasp and say, I can imagine no worse form of abuse. But then when I go on and discuss children who are systematically sexually molested, sometimes in certain cults by their own parents at the instruction of the cult leader, then we see incredible levels of damage. And helping people to come out is a monumental task. And there are literally thousands of cults and millions of people, Americans, that are impacted here. And most mental health professionals, I know Janja would agree with me, do not understand. Even when someone comes in and says, hey, I'm having suicidal thoughts, most therapists are not trained to ask questions like, well, have you ever been involved with a group that's controversial that told you, anything that if you left, terrible things were going to happen to you, or you should kill yourself? And I believe that there are untold numbers of suicides that are happening directly because of cults, because of cult mind control, because someone's getting out as opposed to just they're unhappy with their life. But again, the mental health field is blind to this matter, much as they were blind to child molestation issues before the 60s or 70s when it started coming to the fore.
Right. Steve, you brought up something interesting that I want to take just a minute and pause and talk about. Is it true that children in cults are often exposed to highly abusive behavior, much of it sexual? An example which was cited in the New York Times, which should reflect up on the screen in just a moment, children being sexually exploited. Would you say that type of abuse is the norm?
In certain cults, I wouldn't say across the board, and I think it's difficult when you're trying to describe a broad phenomenon.
Correct.
Because credibility is very important. And did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think what's important to always remember, when you're in one of these groups, you're under the control of the leader or the next level of leadership, right? So that as a parent, because people are probably wondering, well, how could parents go along with some of these things? As a parent, your loyalty is not to your children, it's to your leader and to the group. That loyalty shifts the minute you adopt that worldview, as I talked about earlier, so that whatever happens to the children, whether you as a parent are doing it or whether you're observing it or whether it's the norm of the group, you go along with it, maybe with that same conflict that I felt all those years in my group, but you go along with it because that's the context you're in.
So you don't step in and save your child?
Or if you do step in, you'll get smashed, and
you're punished.
You quickly learn that you're not supposed to step in, so that there is a continual, again, a conflict going on about that because the loyalties are shifted. The only loyalty you can have is to the leader. Again, there's going to be an array of experiences. Not every group is going to be directly abusive to the children, but I know that in my group, the children were just neglected. I mean, who had time? We were working 20-hour days. Who had time for the children? They were shunted, shuffled off to school, picked up from school, thrown into childcare. Somebody was assigned to watch them one night a week. They had no personal attention. They had no personal time with their parents. Is that abuse? I don't know.
But in the case of the Hare Krishnas, where the kids are taken away from their parents and they were sent to schools where they were being homosexually molested systematically year after year after year, that's what the New York Times story was all about. This is horrific. This is absolutely horrific, and the leadership of this group have taken little responsibility to oust those leaders who were doing the systematic perpetration or doing very little, if nothing, to get therapy to all the victims. And this
Larry,
is
your
terrible.
reaction?
Yeah, I have one reaction. Again, I hope this doesn't strike people as too bizarre, but in terms of the fact that a parent would consider his or her primary allegiance to the leader rather than to the child.
That's the norm.
Forgive me for saying this. This is not different from what went on in Nazi Germany or under Stalin in Russia.
That's right. You're absolutely. These are totalitarian societies, little mini totalitarian societies.
And the mind control that Hitler practiced in Germany was just on a larger scale than the Moonies practiced. But it's the same control of behavior, information, thoughts, and feelings, recoding identity.
Can I make ask a question, or maybe it's just a quick comment? As they were talking, it occurred to me one could think of Nazi Germany as one huge cult.
In fact, Robert J. Lifton, who wrote the seminal book on mind control, initially at the behest of military intelligence, was his initial research. He wrote a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism about Chinese communist thought reform programs of the 40s and 50s of Mao. Went on to write a book called The Nazi Doctors, and talked and applied the same paradigm to the Nazis, and in particular focused on doctors who are, by their training, taught to save life, and yet they were systematically destroying life.
This excerpt is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law, the leader of reform in legal education and a leader in multimedia education for the public. To view the full interview and for a full listing of MSL's programs, log on to mslaw.edu.